All right, it looks like we have a pretty good group that's been admitted. So I'm going to go ahead and get things started for our SELA Speaks tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jan McAlister. I am the past president of SELA. Tonight, we have Ralph LaForge with us. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. I had a couple of announcements that I wanted to make. One of the first announcements is I want to make sure everybody is aware of the CLU meeting in Dallas. It is in September. It's the second weekend of September. If you have not already registered, please register. That exact date is going to be September 6th through the 8th in Dallas, Texas. I've looked at the agenda. It's a really great agenda. There's a little bit of something there for everybody. We are still working on possibly a get together for new SELA members. So I hope all of y'all can be there and participate with us. You can go to the NLA website and you can register on the website both for the program and for the hotel room. So very reasonably priced if you're needing more continuing education hours. This is our July SELA Speaks. We do it about once every quarter. Just as an FYI, our next SELA Speaks after tonight is going to be Dr. Michael Blaha. He's going to talk about decreasing ASCVD events by the treatment of residual inflammatory risk and using colchicine. That is scheduled for September 10th at 7 p.m., which once again is a Tuesday night. And this will be after we get back from the CLU in Dallas. So go ahead, you can mark your calendars for that. And of course, you will be getting some emails from the NLA regarding the programs that we're putting on. This is going to be the first SELA Speaks of many SELA Speaks that will award you continuing education hours. We submitted the slides and were awarded one continuing education hour for tonight's program. You will have up until August 9th to do the survey and claim your credit. Kevin is going to list the Survey Monkey at the beginning of the program in the chat, and again at the end of the program in the chat. You'll need to copy and paste it because once the program is over, you won't have access to the chat. So make sure you copy and paste it or write it down so you could do the survey in order to get your awarded credit for attending. So this is something very positive that we've been able to add to our SELA Speaks programs. I am going to go ahead and introduce Ralph LaForge. I am going to ask everyone to please mute their microphones. I know a lot of us are at home, and certainly the household noises can have a tendency to get into the program. It makes the recording much easier to understand as well as the participants. So Ralph LaForge has been a longstanding member of the National Lipid Association. He's a physiologist and past president of the ACCL. He is also past president of the Southeast Lipid Association. He's a consultant to a number of healthcare and accountable care organizations on inauguration systematic approaches to managing lipid disorders and preventative endocrine. He formerly coordinated the University of California of San Diego's exercise science program. He is a senior contractor with the U.S. Indian and Alaskan Health Service Division of Diabetes Treatment and Prevention. He is a teaching faculty at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Complementary and Integrative Medicine. He was formerly coordinated the Duke Lipid Disorder Physician Education Program at Duke University Medical Center Division of Endocrinology, Metabolism, and Nutrition. He's a contract photographer for Nikon Professional Services, including photographer for a number of medical journals. I have worked through FNLA with Ralph for several years, and I'm very, very excited for your talk. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ralph LaForge.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you very much. And let me know if there's any problem with audio or whatever. I will make these slides available. I think Sela, Jan, and Kevin will make these slides available if you wish. More importantly, there are pretty copious note sections for each slide. So I have about 45 slides, so I'll begin. Let's see if I can advance my slide like I thought I could. There we go. So we'll talk about 8 or 9 different topics within the rubric of weight loss and exercise. And I will go through these systematically in the next 40 minutes. But I'm going to start with a conundrum one of my boys, who's a structural engineer in Seattle. And Taylor said, about a year ago, Taylor asked me on email, well, my friend, after a weekend where she was really active, she gained 5 pounds the next few days. And he says, Dad, what is going on? How'd she gain 5 pounds? Because she swam, she did hot yoga, she played volleyball, went on a very long bike ride. And over the course of 2 days, why did she gain? And I said, well, I'll give you some alibis. The net energy expenditure, which we'll talk about, physical activity is different than the gross cost of activity. So even though you may exercise like 300-calorie workout, you have to subtract from that what you would have done anyway. And that's the difference, is the net cost. So people probably don't add that many exercise calories per minute, per hour, per day. They think they do, and we'll explain that later. We'll also talk about, did she compensate for all that exercise with more food, or did she conserve energy expenditure because she was worn out from doing hot yoga and playing volleyball? That's a huge factor. And then fluid compensation and retention, of course, and then menstrual cycle timing. And the reason I say, since it's a woman we're talking about here, it's normal for a woman to gain up to maybe 5 pounds or more in the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. So you have to factor that in as well. So people do put their whole self-worth many times on just gravitational body weight. But my subtitle of that is, what comes along with this gravitational weight? What comes along with it? Fluid, adipose tissue, protein, etc. So if you really think about it, why would just scale weight by itself be so related to so many chronic diseases? And we'll talk a tiny bit about that as we go through. If you look, and you've heard this on infinitum for years, the federal guidelines for exercise, 150 minutes of aerobic activity, or that would be moderate, or 75 minutes of vigorous activity per week. Those are all for, obviously, very healthy guidelines to delay, to some degree, chronic disease. But these levels are generally inadequate for clinically significant weight loss. One of the keys is measuring your total daily energy expenditure, regardless how many times you work out. Total daily energy expenditure, and this has been done on many studies using a variety of techniques to reasonably accurately measure TDEE. If I had anything to say that's different than what I would have said 10 years ago on this topic, in terms of weight loss and exercise, we have not valued light intensity activity throughout the day. Recent data show that promoting low intensity activity sustained for most of the day, that means 30 to 40% of your aerobic capacity max, along with reducing sedentary behavior, is probably the optimal way to sustain weight loss. And that may be a little different to your ears, but that's basically what the last half dozen studies have shown, especially those out of Colorado and in Paris, France, some of the studies. Let me explain that on a graphic. If you look at the blue line here above the green line is total daily energy expenditure, total daily calorie expenditure. A typical day might be for a person who's reasonably fit would be about a 2,800 calorie day. That means over the course of the day, just modestly active with a couple of stair climbs and then maybe a 4 o'clock afternoon a fitness center workout of 500 calories. That's the big blue line right here. Clearly, this is what people generally use to begin the thought process of hoping that they would maintain weight or maybe even lose weight. However, the red line basically shows what if you do something that's maybe 2 to 4 calories per minute for most of the day. You're on your feet, you're moving around, you're carrying, you're doing various household or domestic or business chores. That's also about 2,800 calories a day. In fact, 3 new studies show in general versus the typical relatively fit person that works out 3 or 4 times a week for an hour at 400 or 500 calories, these people who sustain light activity throughout the day actually have better body compositions and either maintain or lose more weight when they're matched for gender and age. And that's something in the Indian Health Service, what I've worked for many years off and on, and now about 80% of my time is working for the diabetes division of the U.S. Indian Health Service. One thing we've been doing is getting people to, reduce sedentary time. And all the bullets here about what we need to do to sustain some movement throughout the day. Standing instead of sitting, taking stairs, household chores count as activity. The more you do there, that's good. What we call activity snacks, 10 to 15 minutes, standing knee bend exercises every 60 to 90 minutes. Those are just some of the many examples we use to break up the day, especially for someone who will not or cannot go to the gym. So the Eastern Finland University has done so much work in looking at light physical activity. And the largest study ever conducted and published a year and a half ago, 6,060 individuals between 11 years of age and 24 years of age. So they watched these people for 13 years. Okay, 13 years. If you look at the very top here, age 11 to age 24, they all were wearing, for the majority of the time, an active cal accelerometer. And that's tough to do for that many people. And looking at body composition changes with DEXA over this 13-year time period. And the long and short of it basically indicated that every 1 minute per day of sedentary time gained about 1.3 grams of fat over the course of the 13-year. On the other side of the coin, every 1 minute per day added of light physical activity over those 13 years generated a significant decrease in total body fat to the order of about 6.3 grams of fat for every 1 minute per day of light activity. So just to give you kind of a relative understanding that you don't necessarily have to do high intensity exercise. That does have other benefits, but certainly steady exercise, movement throughout the day can mean a lot. So if someone said, without knowing anything about them, and they wanted to lose 20 pounds, I said, how much exercise do I have to do? It's a lot. If there's no dietary changes, it's a lot. And I'm always looking at the back data from 30 years ago. We showed basically the same thing. There's nothing really new here, but generally speaking, when someone will begin to ask about weight loss and exercise, we'll shoot for about 5% of their present weight to lose. And this will require 150 to 250 minutes per week of moderate level physical activity. Moderate level, keep in mind, is 40 to 60% of effort max, or 40 to 60% of aerobic endurance maximum. A weight loss greater than 5% will require well over an hour a day, 7 days a week, or at least 5 days a week, but generally over 7 days a week, about an hour. We'll come back to that. Those are black letter manual language outcomes from about a half a dozen major trials and published mainly in the ACSM guidelines, the most recent edition, which is 2022. Now, without any dietary changes, if someone says, I'm just going to eat the way I've always eaten, I'm going to just put all the emphasis on exercise, you're talking at least 225 minutes a week, but closer to 420 minutes per week, or at least an hour or more per day of 40 to 60% of effort max. Now, I'm being fairly simplistic here in terms of just minutes being the calibrated prescription for exercise. People generally don't measure their minutes so much, and maybe in a general way. They're more apt to maybe look at caloric expenditure on a readout on a machine, or step count as in an accelerometer or pedometer outcome. Another thing to keep in mind, now I've been in diabetes preventive endocrinology for quite a few years. One thing that's important for our groups in diabetes management to know that the optimal volume of exercise to achieve sustained major weight loss is probably much larger the amount and volume of exercise to improve blood glucose and A1C. So yes, lower thresholds of exercise energy expenditure do very nice things for insulin sensitization and blood glucose. But if you raise the bar to weight loss, you're talking about significantly more exercise. We have data to also show just an equivalence. Each 1,000 steps per day increment measured either on a cell phone sensor step app or a well-engineered pedometer is associated with a greater reduction in body weight. So that's, if you're trying to equivocate, 1,000 steps per day is it's not much, it's about a half mile, but each half mile increment in walking has a significant effect on energy expenditure, of course, and has some measurable weight loss. I don't probably need to tell you by now that there's more than enough data. I couldn't fit all the studies on one slide by any means, that physical activity can significantly reduce abdominal adipose tissue and improve insulin sensitization without any changes in body weight, in some cases even a gain in lean weight. Fat loss without weight loss. Our finding in this particular study, Sojourner Lee et al. In New England, that 3 months of exercise without weight loss associated with a marked reduction in both total and visceral fat in middle-aged lean men and obese women. This is consistent with previous observations by Canadian researchers like Robert Ross, etc. So this is something that keep in the back of mind that, again, if you're looking at weight loss itself, scale weight loss, that's the highest threshold measure of energy expenditure, and far less than that are measurable health improvements. And we can see there was adipose tissue changes that are measured by MRI and DEXA as well, with just as little as 3 or 4 months of high intensity interval training, or even moderate intensity sustained aerobic training in terms of reducing subcutaneous adipose tissue. And I think you probably understand by now that when adipose tissue inflammatory mediators drop as we lose fat weight, especially in the viscera. It is leptin, CRP, TNF alpha, IL-6, IL-18, all these inflammatory markers do improve and don't necessarily require inordinate scale weight losses. Is there preferential fat loss? And of course, everybody would like to say, I'd like to isolate the buttocks or the lower thighs or whatever. To some degree, that may happen. We do know this, and this is replicated in a number of trials. The intramuscular fat, especially in the thigh, is probably the first fat stores to be oxidized, even more so than abdominal visceral adipose tissue. And we find that if you have an exercise program of 6 months and matched with an equivalent energy decrement and caloric restriction dietary group, match for the energy expenditure in the exercise group is going to have more intramuscular fat reduction and then the caloric restriction group. We've seen that in trials. Another way to look at this, maybe even more graphically, when you look at ectopic fat, that's fat that's not usually in the fat stores that we usually think around by the waist. We're talking about liver fat and, of course, intramuscular fat like the biceps or the thigh or the gastrocs, okay? Available evidence suggests that there is a likely a benefit of exercise in these fat stores that I had mentioned earlier. If you look at the first microgram of fatty acid to be oxidized, it would be intramuscular fat stores in the intramitochondrial membranes. Where does that get its replenishment from? From blood triglycerides and ultimately from visceral ectopic fat. But it's just to say, it doesn't mean that every time you walk 5 miles, your thigh is going to be 2 inches less diameter. But it does say that that's a preferential fat store for losing weight or exercising for the express purpose to lose weight and to burn fat calories. The slight majority will, at least early on in the program, it's been shown to come from a lower extremity intramuscular fat, especially at the thighs. One thing I've nabbed of personal trainers and some fitness instructors, if you exercise, this speedometer is just, this red arrow points to how fast you're going. 20% of your max, 40% of your max, 60, 80, 90, 100%. Okay. Yes, the slower you go, the lower percentage of maximum exercise effort that you're expending, the more fat you're oxidizing compared with carbohydrate. However, it's only 3 to 4 to 5 calories per minute. If as you cross the 50, 55, 60% of max aerobic power, exercise intensity, you begin to show a preferential oxidation of glycogen and sugar stores, and blood glucose included. So early on, there was a lot of scuttlebutt about the slower you go, the more fat you're going to burn, the more weight you're going to lose, which is ludicrous. That does not happen. In fact, the simplest way to say this, if you look at the ideal mix of energy substrates, that is fat and carbohydrate oxidation, it's about 65% of your maximum aerobic power effort level is probably the ideal middle ground for exercise intensity, for burning plenty of calories, but not such an intensity where you're producing a lot of lactate and aerobic power output where you can't exercise much longer than 4 or 5 minutes. So 60 to 70% of effort max, whether you're swimming, walking, bicycle riding, whatever it may be, is probably the ideal intensity for expending the most calories. Yes, for those of us that still measure anthropometric measures, waist circumference measures is still the gold standard, short of actual measurement with DEXA or MRI or whatever. If you're going to use waist measures as an outcomes measure, I would strongly encourage you to use the one and only Gulick. A Gulick is a weighted tape that you pull the lanyard to the point where you see 4 ounces of pressure right about there on the lanyard, and everybody that you measure their waist across the serial return visit measures are going to have the same pressure on that waist tape measure. So it'll be consistent pulling on the attention pulling on the tape. Otherwise, you can always get better outcomes of tugging a little bit more every outcome on that tape measure. Not with the Gulick. You replicate exactly the same amount of tension on that tape. Gulicks cost about anywhere from $20 to $30. Many groups make them now. You see them all over the internet. That'd be my advice if you're going to use waist circumference. From a metabolic risk reduction standpoint, it's probably more judicious to target small incremental reductions in visceral abdominal fat than obsess with unrealistic goals and total body weight. So whether you're measuring that or estimating it, or using body fat measures, even if you're skilled at measuring with calipers, anthropometry with calipers like Lang calipers, if you're really skilled at using calipers, you're going to have better indications and outcomes which showing changes in tricep and umbilicus fat folds than you would with scale weight. You would, in other words, you'd be isolating a lot more fat weight reduction than just using the scale weight to show diminution in fat stores. Now, that being said, I'm going to throw a wrench into the monkey mix here. Herman Ponster, who is the evolutionary anthropologist, world-renowned, publishes in Scientific American and Science and Nature. I don't think he's got any publications in the FNLA publication, Lipid Spin, or ACSM's journal. Oh my gosh. He has shown with his studies in energy expenditure in populations around the world, including our own, of how the human energy engine, the muscular engine, burns calories, help explain why physical activity does little to control weight, and how our species acquired some of its most distinctive traits. Now, what am I getting at here? I always like to couch it as lies my Fitbit told me about how many calories I burn and how much weight I'm going to lose. Yes, a Fitbit or some of the better fitness trackers do estimate gross energy expenditure. I'm not going to call it accurate, but it borders on reasonable accuracy. However, those are gross energy expenditures. So essentially what Herman has saying in his database is that people with the most intensely daily active lives that are worked out every day for 90 minutes, for example, burned or expended the same number of calories each day as those with modestly or moderately active lives. You go, how can that possibly be? Comes down to energy conservation. Even the Hadassa populations of Tanzania that he studied, yes, hunters and gatherers, they spent a lot of energy chasing their next meal and for endurance games. But they also took inordinate rest periods after these long periods of energy expenditure. In other words, they conserved energy for the rest of the day. Today I think I had a photographic project, but I had to hike 11 miles to get it done. And then I stayed in bed reading my email for 2.5 hours after it. Oh, so I probably lost some of the energy expenditure benefit. But what we're saying here is that energy conservation on the right here decreased spontaneous physical activity as a result of decreased energy because you did so much exercise on that weekend, or your hikes, or your skiing, or your general workout. So he has shown that one reason it's going to be hard to show, and this does have exceptions, how people who do work out to these levels that we advise on terms of minutes per day, minutes per week, caloric expenditure, is muddied by how much they conserve as a result of where, I'm not going to use the word probably inaccurately, but by wearing themselves out with all this exercise, they actually burn fewer calories the rest of the day than they would have otherwise had they not worked out that much. Energy compensation is simply increased food intake as a result of appetite stimulation, and that can go either way. But energy conservation is the real key to understanding total daily energy expenditure, which is about the same for people who go to the gym a lot versus people who do light activity over the course of the day, but don't necessarily go to the gym for an hour, 500-calorie workout. The other thing that is important to understand when you read these Fitbit displays or the energy cost display on your elliptical trainer is the difference between the net and gross cost of that exercise. So all the prediction numbers you see on the caloric readouts on your Fitbit, on the elliptical trainer, treadmill, bicycle, whatever, are gross costs. So the gross cost, for instance, for a 20-minute, 3-mile-an-hour walk, about a mile, it's about 80 calories, but you have to subtract from that what you would have done anyway had you not been on the treadmill. So the difference is about half of what you thought you burnt in terms of the actual expended energy over and above what you would have done anyway. So the net difference is about 50 calories per mile. And that's true for walking, for instance. Net energy cost of walking is about 60% of running energy for a given distance, okay? Yes, treadmill versus land, treadmill caloric expenditure is somewhat less because it's providing you a 4 or 5 horsepower motor to provide the inertia for the next foot strike, where if you're walking on land, it takes a few more calories to carry forth that limb for the next foot strike. One thing in Indian country we're really good at doing is mapping out circuits around where native lands are that have variable terrain. And if you add any terrain to a walk, you're going to add at least 20% energy expenditure. That's one way to boost caloric expenditure. So as a reminder, just understand, yes, it's nice to see that the calorimeter on the treadmill said that you expended 440 calories. Those are gross costs. In general sense, you probably about 250 in terms of more calories than you would have spent had you gone on to work. How about GLP-1 agonists? I won't spend a lot of time on this. We all know Wegovy and Ozempic and all the others. If you add exercise to the GLP-1 agonist, you're going to double your return on the investment for weight loss. And here's the newer data from University of Copenhagen. If you stop these GLP-1 agonists and you're still exercising, you maintain the GLP-1 induced weight loss. That's new. Actually, 2 papers reported that, both from the University of Helsinki and the University of Copenhagen have both shown this. Also, if you add exercise to these GLP-1 agonists, you're going to boost bone mineral density. There's some indication that it's slightly reduced with just the GLP-1 agonists. So remember, exercise has other benefits than just the weight loss induced, or the added weight loss induced to these particular new drugs. How about resistance exercise? I don't say this too loudly in my fitness center because I'd have people all over me, but resistance training will not promote clinically significant weight loss, but that's not the whole story. And this has been shown in so many studies in terms of caloric expenditure. Yes, it does burn calories, maybe 20 to 25% for a given period of time versus running versus doing 3 or 4 sets of various resistance exercises. However, we do know that lower body exercise, resistance exercise like squats presents a higher energy cost. So half squat, leg extension involved, the highest energy cost versus a smaller muscle group like bicep curls and lat pull downs. So if you're really interested in burning more calories, do all the exercises, 6 to 8 to 10 different exercises, but make sure lower body exercise, resistance exercise is part of the mix, 10 to 15 reps. You'll burn more calories with the larger muscle groups. Also, there had been a wealth of data over the last 2 decades of what about the afterburn, the afterglow you get with resistance training. Well, it is true that resting energy expenditure is increased as much as 150 calories over a 24-hour period, but that means you did a significant work level. You did 8 to 10 exercises, spent 45 minutes at an RM max of maybe 10. That means you 10 reps for 8 different exercises and maybe 2 or 3 sets. Yes, your energy expenditure post-exercise and recovery over the next 12 to 24 hours is elevated. It's still not as much as it would be for a total equivalent time aerobic workout at 65% of aerobic max. However, the harder you work out with resistance training, yes, the more energy expenditure you see, even during sleeping. If you look over here on the right, what Kurt and others had said at Southern Illinois University is that even when sleeping, which is basically resting energy expenditure, the resistance training days were anywhere from 3 to 4% greater energy expenditure while sleeping than if you did not do the resistance training. But that's still a small number of calories. It may look like a big bar graph, but you're only talking maybe 30, 40, 50 calories more than you would have otherwise had you not done a significant heavy resistance training workout. So let me just begin to end this discussion with what would be a time efficient. If someone says, well, I may make some dietary changes, but is there any evidence base of a prescription that might get me up to 10 pounds or 10% weight loss over 12 to 24 weeks, 3 to 6 months? Yes. Here's an example. Let's say Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you had very little time because of the heavy work week. You get a 20-minute walk in 3 times a week. But one weekend day, which we call an LSD exercise, that means long, slow distance, you do a 2-hour drop off. That means your spouse takes you 2 hours from home, drops you off, see you in 2 hours over variable terrain. Now that's an exaggeration, but actually it's worked for me in training for marathons. But one weekend significant, nearly 1,200 calorie workout, which would be about a 2+ hour variable terrain hike over hilly ground. Maybe not mountains, but hilly ground. Would be anywhere from 1,000, 1,200 calories, depending on your BMI. And then Tuesday and Saturday, you did 5 to 8 resistance exercises for 30 minutes each session. And then on top of all that, you decrease sedentary time by 30 minutes every day. That means 30 minutes of sitting that you would have done otherwise sitting, you do something, however slight, you're on your feet. And you do that for 30 minutes, 7 times a week. You add all it up, it's about 300 minutes per week or 2,000 plus calories. I can assure you're going to be over 5% weight reduced, but probably closer to 10%. And when we say variable terrain, yes, it would be nice to have variable terrain like the Southeast Cornwall walk around the whole Southeast Peninsula of England, obviously. But I'm just talking about using gravity to add a little bit of energy expenditure to a given 1 or 2 or 3 mile walk. So I will close with this slide, just some summary statements. Light physical activity throughout the day can induce fat loss. Think increase total daily energy expenditure. Now, let me just say this. Light activity versus even moderate, certainly intense activity, doesn't predispose itself to energy conservation. You're not as likely to go and lie down for an hour after a hard workout if you're light to moderately active throughout the day. So you take energy conservation out of the equation. Physical activity without significant weight loss should be considered. PA itself is a primary outcome. I've always said every step you take is an AMP kinase activator. It works just like metformin. It's an insulin sensitizer. That should be, if you're looking at just risk reduction, that from my bias is the best outcomes measure. Every muscle contraction. Visceral fat loss can occur even when participants experience small or no weight loss. Physical activity without dietary changes requires at least an hour a day for meaningful weight loss. Energy compensation and conservation impact weight loss. Yes, it's a paradox, as I explained from what Herman Poncer had shown in his numerous papers he's written worldwide, is because of the contamination of the conservation of energy after sustained high-level physical activity. Finally, as I said in this previous slide, 3 days a week of moderate physical activity. Just do something every day a week, at least every other day, and then 1 weekend day, put a 1,000-calorie workout in, like a variable terrain hike. And then, of course, on top of that, decrease sedentary time if possible. I'll end up with this one reference. These guidelines is almost 400 pages. Every 3 years, the American College of Sports Medicine put this guideline set out. And it's the most evidence-based, maybe not the easiest to read, but it's the bottom line to thresholds for expecting, whether it be changes in insulin sensitization or weight loss or psychopathology. It's probably the best single resource we have for backing up at least what I've been saying for the last 40 minutes. So I'll conclude with just one sentence: just move and move often. Thank you.
Oh, Ralph, that was great. A lot of very useful information. I loved your example that you listed there for us, that we could use that as a teaching point to our patients. Very well done. Thank you so much. I do have a couple of questions already in the chat. If you want to ask a question, you can unmute your phone and you can ask. I'm going to go ahead and start off with the ones that are in the chat. Ralph, what are your thoughts of the use of a weighted vest with household chores and daily walks?
I'm sorry, with a weighted what?
Vest that you can wear.
Okay. Definitely increases energy expenditure without question. The only thing well, if you're just doing household chores, yes, or a backpack with a 5-pound weight, yes, absolutely. But using it for for walking or certainly running, it changes your mechanics of your gait, which is not good. But if it's just household chores and activities of daily living, yes. I mean, I'm just thinking of the heat index today in the Southeast. It's just hard for me to fathom doing that even in air conditioning. But yes, there's a fair amount of data on that is a pleasant way. Now, there's an energy cost to that, but there's also a blood pressure cost to it. So pick your patients wisely if you're screening patients for doing such a behavior.
Great information. Is there any data that resistance training and increased muscle mass help weight maintenance?
Yes, there is. And it's probably not the energy expenditure. It's probably once you've gained the lean mass, it'll take a couple of years. And as long as you maintain that mass for it to have a return on the investment metabolically. Yes, there is. But again, remember, when you say I want to increase muscle mass, it's not just, 2 exercises twice a week. You're talking about a fairly significant time investment in the weight room. But yes, depending on how much you gain, you sustain that gain in lean mass. There are definite metabolic benefits.
And someone asked, is losing muscle mass bad, and how can we avoid it?
Well, that's the thing we're worried about, the GLP-1 agonists. They don't do a darn thing for lean mass, which is very important with metabolic disease. Yes, you lose weight and you decrease systolic blood pressure level, and you even improve slightly the lipid profile. But in the long run, we don't know what's going to happen yet with such an outcome. I would just be very cautious. As you lose lean mass, your tendency as you get over 55 to fall and have fall injuries. That's been well shown. Okay. So hip flexor strength, and that is the 4 thigh muscle groups that help when you walk downstairs and you're braking yourself for the next step. If that's a weak muscle that because you haven't used it much with walking or doing various exercises, but you've lost weight, you still have a tendency, a greater probability of falling. So losing muscle mass has impressive diminution in function and propensity for fall injuries. I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. So I have a question, but Kevin, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and post the Survey Monkey. Don't forget, you need to fill out the survey for your CME credits. So either copy it down or copy and paste it so you complete the survey and can get your 1 hour CME credit. My question is, I assume a lot of this data really comes from taking someone who doesn't do much, implementing these exercises and evaluating them. And that's really probably, I would think, where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. What if you have a patient who's already halfway there, doing their moderate part with resistance and cardio? How much is it going to help that individual?
Now, tell me the individual again.
So I assume this data came from people who started with nothing or did very little, and you added the routine and evaluated them. What if you have a patient who's already halfway there? They do half of everything you described already. To convince them to go that extra half, how much more of a benefit is it for them?
Yeah, it depends on the age of the patient. And I'll show you why in a minute. But yes, I don't know if they have to go the other complete half on the resistance. It's been shown by Berger and others 50 years ago, and that data has not changed, that 2 days a week, at the most 3 days a week of resistance training for 5 or 6 exercises for a total of 30 minutes each workout is more than enough to significantly increase muscle mass and improve strength, okay? Anything beyond that, yes, there's added benefit. So I don't know, I would put that, when you say the other half of the way, I would put that other half of the way in walking or aerobic endurance exercise. Now, that said, this happens to be on my mind right now because I'm developing a fall prevention program for diabetic Native Americans. As you approach 60, 65 years of age, balance becomes more important than strength or probably even aerobic endurance. Not that they're not important, but your sense of balance. So balance exercises need to be part of the mix after 60 years of age, in addition to the aerobic endurance and resistance training. So that should be something that we thought about. So balance after 60 added to aerobic and resistance training.
Great. Thank you. We do have another question. Your latest thoughts on using Fitbits and other fitness trackers to track physical activity and set goals on this data. Do you recommend it or not?
No, I don't. I'm not against them. I have my own. It's not a Fitbit, it's a Withington. Just know that wrist-worn devices measure fewer steps than good waist-worn or cell phone sensors. So if you're going to measure steps, and I'm only relating this to steps, it's been shown in multiple, it's even here at the University of North Carolina, Chris Moore has shown this multiple times. Your wrist measured steps throughout the day is going to be about 8 or 9% less than the steps measured by the piezoelectric sensor in your cell phone. So, so Fitbits are fine. They do everything but your horoscope, and I'm probably will do that now. But they just add more information. Some of it's superfluous. Keep in mind they measure overall step or fitness trackers measure steps the best. Energy or the distance that you walk around a little bit less accurate, and the least accurate, and this has been well shown, is energy expenditure, unless you're going to use an active cow, which is $1,500, and that's a whole different thing that you probably would not buy. So I'm not against them. I don't think they're necessary for all the numbers they create.
Okay, I have one more question, but before I do that, someone asked about archiving these. These programs are all recorded. They're at the NLA website. Neil and I, Celia Speaks are all recorded. You can certainly look at those archived presentations. We had one more question about the latest side effect from the GLP-1s, eye neuropathy. Anybody on the WebEx or the Zoom call have any feedback as far as these latest side effects?
There was some reported today, but these are just 1 in a million types. What was it? I seen pancreatitis, but that's like 2 out of 10,000, you know. What was the one I saw today?
There was one on the podcast, the Docs Who Lift have a whole podcast on this. They were our guests on Celia Speaks previously, Carl and Spencer Nadolski. They have a whole 1 hour thing on it with a ophthalmologist. And bottom line, bottom line, the study's flawed. And it looks like some of the effect was due to rapid weight loss and rapid drops in blood pressure and people not readjusting their blood pressure meds. So they're getting hypotensive at night. That seems to be a big risk factor. So
yeah, it's too early to make any. I mean, I remember when lovastatin came out. Oh my God.
Right.
Oh,
you remember that, Ralph? Yeah,
I do. Yeah. But anyway, it's a little early to tell. But
yeah.
Well, thank you, Ralph. We appreciate your time, and we've actually come to the end of the Zoom.